Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we unpack complex information and find the most important insights just for you.
Hey there!
Today, we're diving into something that feels, well, it feels less like a prediction and maybe more like a blueprint. It's for fundamentally redesigning how we live.
Yeah, it's based on this document, What Are Conscious Towns, by José Julio Córdova Jaramillo, known as Jota, and interestingly, an AI collaborator named Onto.
An AI collaborator. Okay, that's different. And this
Yeah.
Onto is described as customized for reasoning using ontosynclecticist logic.
Right, that's the term they use. Adds another layer, doesn't it? But the document itself, it doesn't waste time. The core argument is, well, startlingly direct.
How so?
It basically says, the way most of us live right now, cities, suburbs, even newer attempts like smart cities or eco-villages, it's fundamentally failing.
Failing how? Like practically?
At a systemic level, yeah. Failing to provide what humans actually need to thrive. Things like clarity in our lives, trust in our systems and each other, and having enough quality time. They have a term for it, time wealth.
Time wealth. Okay, I like that. So it's a pretty bold thesis right from the start. They're not just saying things need tweaking. They're saying the whole structure is flawed.
Exactly. And their proposed solution isn't just a modification. It's building something entirely different, what they call walkable, co-evolving human-scale living systems.
Okay, walkable, co-evolving, human-scale living systems. That's a mouthful, but it sounds intentional.
Very intentional. And our mission today for this deep dive is really to get under the hood of this vision. What is a conscious town, beyond the label?
Right. What does it actually mean?
And why do Jota and Onto believe our current ways of living are so broken that this kind of radical shift is needed? How is it actually designed to work day to day? Not just the buildings, but the social side, the economy, the governance.
All of it. The whole stack.
The whole stack. And why do they frame it not just as like a nice idea, but maybe even inevitable? We're going to pull out the core logic, dig into the specific systems they propose, and look for those surprising details that make this vision tick.
All right. Let's unpack this blueprint for potentially a very different kind of future.
Let's. So the first thing they tackle is clarity, establishing what conscious towns actually are. They start with the core guiding logic, the main thesis, and they're really precise about it.
Okay.
This isn't being presented as some kind of utopia or just another social experiment. They define them very specifically as modular, walkable, human-scale living systems.
Modular, walkable, human-scale living systems. That phrase seems key. It sounds simple, but I bet unpacking each piece is crucial. What's the core purpose behind that description?
The purpose is to directly tackle what they see as the deep failures of our current model, cities, suburbs, and even those partial solutions like eco-villages or smart cities.
Okay.
The authors argue these systems are structurally incapable of delivering what humans really need: clarity in daily life, trust both in each other and the systems themselves, and that crucial time wealth. So the conscious town is designed, like, from the ground up to provide an environment where life works in those specific ways, and crucially, within systems that aren't static, but can actually learn and evolve with the people living there.
Okay, so adaptable systems.
Exactly. And they immediately contrast this with what they aren't. Not pie-in-the-sky fantasies, not just slapping smart tech onto old problems, and definitely not just nature retreats cut off from everything. They are engineered systems.
That emphasis on system and design feels like a big shift. They mentioned struggling to find the right definition. Why was nailing the language so important?
Because, as they put it, old words carry the ghosts of old failures. Call it a smart city, and people immediately think surveillance, efficiency over humanity.
Yeah, or just tech for tech's sake.
Exactly. Call it an eco-village. And people might picture something small, maybe a bit isolated, unable to scale or handle real-world complexity. Utopia just invites dismissal as unrealistic.
Right. It sounds nice, but impossible.
So they needed a definition that instantly signals this is something different. A complete integrated system for living, designed for, the human operating system, not an industrial or purely digital one.
Okay, so what is that hard-won, precise definition they finally landed on?
It's this: a complete walkable system where life works. Built at human scale, it brings food, education, care, governance, and energy into a single co-evolving environment designed for clarity, trust, and time freedom.
A complete walkable system where life works. That phrase, life works, is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. Let's break that definition down using their terms. What does complete really mean here?
Complete is all about autonomy and resilience. It means the fundamental things you need for life: Food, energy, water, care, education, governance, they're all generated and managed within the town itself.
So not relying on these long, fragile supply chains or distant bureaucracies for the basics.
Precisely. It's a huge shift from how most places work now, where everything feels outsourced and disconnected.
Totally. Okay, next term, walkable. What's the deep meaning there?
Walkable is way more than just having sidewalks. It's a core design philosophy. It puts the human body, human time, and even, interestingly, the human nervous system right at the center.
Okay.
The layout is explicitly designed for people moving on foot or maybe bikes, not cars. This means your daily needs, getting food, maybe going to a workspace, school, social spots, are all within an easy, comfortable walking distance. They often mention a 5-minute radius.
5 minutes. That's close.
Yeah. And they link this directly to reclaiming time, that time wealth, and significantly reducing the baseline stress that comes from needing a car for absolutely everything.
So walkability isn't just exercise. It's a structural way to give people back time and reduce daily friction. Makes sense. What about system?
System is absolutely fundamental. This isn't just, a collection of nice buildings or a pretty park. It's about the deep integration of all the town's functions.
How so?
How energy connects to housing design, how local food production links into the education system, how resident feedback actually shapes governance decisions. It's designed as a single, interconnected organism where all the parts work together dynamically, constantly interacting.
Like a living thing, almost.
That's the idea. And the measure of success is that phrase, where life works. How is that actually measured?
Yeah, how do you quantify life works?
That's their core metric, and they're very clear. It's measured by whether the town demonstrably produces clarity, trust, and time wealth for the people living there.
Okay.
If those specific outcomes aren't improving, then by its own definition, the system isn't working. It's a radical shift away from measuring success by, say, GDP growth or rising property values towards directly measuring human well-being and the quality of life.
Clarity, trust, time wealth, the actual felt experience.
Ooh.
That's different. Now, human scale. What does that mean when you apply it to a whole town?
Human scale means the entire design, the physical layout, the social structures, the civic processes is deliberately tuned to the limits and capabilities of the human nervous system.
The nervous system. How does that work?
It's about creating environments where relationships can form naturally, where you can genuinely understand how decisions get made, where you can actually see and comprehend the systems supporting your life. They mention things like, the limits on how many meaningful relationships we can maintain Dunbar's number, that sort of thing.
Right. About 150 people.
Exactly. And also how quickly we can process information without getting overwhelmed. It's designing for our actual biological, psychological, and civic capacities, not for machines or abstract economic models.
Okay. So it's less about just physical size, like small town versus big city, and more about cognitive and relational capacity. Can we grasp it? Can we relate within it?
Precisely. When a city gets too big, you lose that human scale. Suddenly, you don't know where your food comes from. The bureaucracy becomes this opaque maze. Your feedback feels like shouting into the void. That's what breaks down.
Yeah, you feel disconnected.
Conscious towns aim to stay within that sweet spot where things feel manageable, understandable, and therefore trustworthy.
Now, the last part of the definition, single co-evolving environment.
This points to the adaptive nature of the system. It's not meant to be rigid or finished. It's designed to listen to the residents, listen to the local environment, listen to its own performance data, and to change over time based on that input.
Okay.
The different layers of the town aren't static zones, but fluid systems that evolve. It's conceived as a living system, constantly learning and adjusting, not a fixed blueprint stamped onto the land.
So, putting it all together, this definition is loaded. And like you said, it very intentionally carves out its own space. It's not a smart city, not an eco-village, not a startup hub, not a commune.
Right. It's essentially saying, we've looked at the partial successes and the fatal flaws of all those other models, and we've synthesized something new, something designed to be complete and adaptive at a human scale.
Let's dive a bit deeper into that human scale idea. You mentioned it's about tuning systems to the human nervous system. How does that play out in specific design choices?
Well, it affects everything, from the distances you routinely walk to the way decisions are presented and made. Instead of, endless anonymous sprawl, you have those walkable pods and super blocks where your daily needs are genuinely close.
Right, that 5-minute walk.
Exactly. And instead of these huge faceless bureaucracies where you don't know who's responsible, you have transparent, feedback-based governance systems. Systems where you can actually see who's accountable for what, and you have clear channels to provide input directly.
So the scale itself is chosen to make trust and understanding easier.
That's a huge part of it. Trust develops more naturally when you have regular, low-stakes interactions with the people involved in your daily life. The person running the local food hub, the educators in the community learning space, the stewards maintaining your shared infrastructure.
Yeah, you see them around.
You see them around. And feedback feels meaningful when you can actually observe the impact of your input on your immediate environment. When cities get too big, those feedback loops stretch and break. Trust erodes because everything feels distant and abstract, and clarity just evaporates. You feel disconnected, maybe even powerless.
Okay, but how do they avoid the potential isolation of really small villages while staying human scale? Some villages can feel cut off.
That's where the modular scaling comes in. The smallest units, the pods, are definitely human-scaled, but they're specifically designed to connect seamlessly into larger structures, the superblocks, and then into the town as a whole.
Ah, nested systems.
Exactly. It's like scaling by repeating a clear, understandable pattern, rather than creating one single monolithic entity that just gets bigger and more complex and centralized. So you get the benefits of local connection and access to broader systems and opportunities without losing that essential human feel.
In contrasting it again with smart cities, the focus isn't on using data to control people's behavior.
No, they're very explicit about this. The goal is co-regulation and coherence, not control. Data and technology are tools to make the system itself transparent, responsive, and accountable to human needs, accountable to ecological health, not tools to monitor and manipulate individuals.
Okay.
It's about reintegrating all the different facets of life, our biology, our community connections, our environment, our governance, into a readable, understandable whole, using tech ethically as a support tool.
Got it. Are there any other specific human-scale details mentioned in the document that stood out to you?
Yeah, a few things. They talk about prioritizing rest over sheer speed. The design itself should encourage a pace of life that actually supports well-being, not constant rushing.
That sounds nice.
Doesn't it? Education is embedded within daily life and community spaces, not locked away in separate school buildings you have to commute to. Health is framed proactively. The environment itself is designed to promote health through easy access to good food, safe places for movement, connection with nature, and strong social ties. Community itself is seen as health infrastructure.
Right, it's built in.
Governance, as we touched on, is based on visible feedback and performance, not distant, often polarizing elections. Even the architecture is meant to align with the human body, the local climate, and community needs, not just developer profits or abstract aesthetics.
Wow.
And they even get down to specific scale units like those 5-minute walkable pods, keeping civic gatherings ideally under 500 people so they feel participatory, designing system dashboards that are actually readable and usable by residents, making governance records auditable. They call this the Intelligence Foundation, designing systems that work with our innate human wiring, not against it.
It really is a comprehensive design philosophy applied across every single layer. Let's look at those layers now. The conscious system stack. This is the integrated infrastructure you mentioned.
Right. They describe it as a full-stack living system engineered so that core needs are met right there within the town, which builds that autonomy and helps prevent systemic collapse if external systems falter.
Okay, let's start at the bottom of the stack, the foundational layers. Energy and food. What's the design there?
These are designed to be regenerative by default. Think local energy production, decentralized microgrids, probably powered heavily by solars, maybe supplemented by wind, geothermal, whatever makes sense bioregionally. Water capture, purification, and reuse systems are integral parts of the design.
Okay.
And food production is local and integrated right into the town. Fabric, rooftop gardens, vertical farms, community plots, maybe partnerships with nearby regenerative farms. The why behind it is crystal clear. System autonomy, freedom from fragile, energy-intensive, distant supply chains. Resilience starts right there.
Makes sense. Building self-reliance from the ground up. What about housing and space design?
This layer is designed around being modular, walkable, and repairable. Housing units aren't just fixed boxes, they're flexible, designed to adapt over time as needs change. Maybe a space starts as a home, then part becomes a workshop, then later it's easily reconfigured into 2 smaller units.
Adaptable spaces.
Yeah, And they're organized into those walkable pods we discussed, which naturally encourage community interaction. Streets prioritize people walking, cycling, not cars dominating the space. Public areas are designed as active civic hubs for gathering, interaction, and shared activities, not just empty plazas. It's about shaping the physical environment to actively support the desired way of life, scaling from the intimate pod level up to the superblock, while always keeping that human scale in focus.
So the architecture itself becomes a tool for community building and long-term flexibility. Interesting. Next layer up. Education and health.
These are described with keywords like flipped, embedded, and regenerative. Instead of being separate institutions you travel to, they're woven right into the fabric of daily life within the town.
How does that work practically?
Education becomes more project-based, intergenerational, leveraging the skills and knowledge that already exist within the community. Learning happens in context. Health is proactive, not reactive. The environment itself, the walkability, the access to fresh food and nature, the spaces designed for movement and rest, the strong social fabric is the primary health system. Community connection is explicitly viewed as crucial health infrastructure.
Wow, that's a big shift.
It is. It's about living a healthy, learning life as a natural consequence of how the town is designed, rather than these being separate, effortful pursuits you have to schedule and pay for outside your daily routine.
That's fascinating. Okay, moving up the stack to governance, you mentioned System AAN and CSES earlier. Let's unpack those.
Right, this is where the design gets particularly innovative and really diverges from our typical models. System AAN, that's the Adaptive Assignment Network, essentially replaces traditional elections and political hierarchies.
Replaces elections.
With performance contracts for civic roles. So if a role is needed managing the water system, coordinating a learning pod, stewarding a public space, it comes with clear deliverables, transparent feedback mechanisms, a finite term, and renewal based on measurable outcomes, not on popularity or campaigning.
Governance as a service contract, almost.
That's a good way to put it. The authors themselves call it non-democratic but post-authoritarian. It's structured, it's accountable, but it avoids the pitfalls of personality cults or entrenched power structures because leadership rotates based on demonstrated performance against agreed-upon metrics.
Okay, that's a different model. And
Right.
CSES, the economic system.
CSES is the Conscious Surplus Economic System. This is their proposed post-capitalist economic framework, designed specifically to prevent extraction and prioritize collective well-being.
How does it do that? What are the key parts?
Several key elements. First, capped ROI, return on investment. This means external investments have a predefined limit on their financial return. The goal is stable, regenerative yield that supports the town, not maximizing extraction for faraway shareholders.
Okay, limits profit extraction.
Second, surplus sharing. Any actual surplus generated by the town's integrated systems, maybe excess energy produced, extra food harvested, isn't just sold off. It's tracked, and its value is shared and reinvested back into the community commons, maybe through funding shared assets or reducing costs for residents.
Keeps the value local.
Third, and this is huge, Universal Basic Assets, UBA. This guarantees all residents access to the foundational necessities, secure housing, clean energy, sufficient food, basic care as a right of residency. This decouples basic survival from the absolute necessity of competitive wage labor, creating a foundation of security.
Wow, UBA, that's a big piece.
And finally, there's often a complementary time credit economy for local exchange. Value is created and exchanged based on contributions of time, skills, and participation within the community, running alongside or even replacing traditional currency for many local needs.
So the benchmark for this economy isn't GDP.
Absolutely not. The benchmark is real wealth, that combination of clarity, trust, time wealth, physical health, ecological health. The entire economic system is explicitly designed to generate that, not just financial accumulation.
The economy serves life, not the other way around. Okay, one more layer in the stack. Culture.
Yeah, and culture isn't just seen as something that randomly emerges. It's viewed as essential connective tissue, the operating system for shared meaning and belonging, and it's intentionally cultivated. Engineered for coherence is the phrase they use.
Engineered culture. How do you engineer culture?
Through specific embedded design elements. First, symbols. These aren't just decorative, they're functional signals integrated into the environment and systems. Think clear visual emblems for different civic roles or contracts, simple color coding indicating the status of local resource loops, intuitive iconography guiding you through spaces or processes. They make the environment legible, communicate shared values instantly, and reduce the need for complicated instructions or bureaucracy.
A shared visual language.
Exactly. Second, rituals. These are crucial for anchoring collective rhythm, presence, and connection. Think regular, predictable events like weekly shared meals using surplus food, seasonal festivals that mark cycles of the year or system recalibrations, maybe public forums for expressing gratitude or acknowledging contributions. These weave shared meaning into the experience of time and place, preventing the systems from feeling cold or purely transactional.
Grounding the community.
And third, archetypes. They introduce specific functional archetypes like Emma the Steward, Rosa the Builder, Cincinnato the Leader in Withdrawal, not as rigid roles, but as recognizable patterns or models for contributing to the town's life. They help people understand different ways they can engage their energy and skills, providing clarity on valued forms of contribution.
So they provide pathways for people to see themselves contributing.
Right. It's about creating the invisible infrastructure of shared meaning, trust, and belonging.
Okay, so that's the full stack. Energy, food, housing space, education, health, governance, AAN, economy, CSES, and culture. Why does integrating all of this work, according to the document?
The core reason is coherence. The layers aren't designed in isolation. They constantly inform and influence each other. Feedback from one layer, say, the health metrics showing rising stress levels in a certain pod can directly trigger adjustments in another layer, like governance looking at workloads or education adding mindfulness programs.
Ah, the feedback loops connect everything.
Exactly. Every part of the system is designed to contribute intelligence to the whole, and it scales not by creating a bigger, more complex central hub, but by replicating these clear, modular, interconnected units. It's localized, it's traceable, and it's designed for dynamic interaction and adaptation.
That interconnectedness feels absolutely key. It's not a menu of features. It really is conceived as a single living organism. And those core principles you mentioned right at the start, modularity, walkability, and feedback, seem to be the structural DNA that makes this organism viable.
They are the structural clarity, absolutely. They aren't just buzzwords. They are the design principles that create a system capable of evolving without breaking down, serving its residents without extracting from them, and scaling without losing its essential human-centric nature and coherence.
So how does modularity specifically build that resilience?
Think of it like having lots of small, interconnected, but somewhat autonomous systems instead of one giant monolithic one that's incredibly fragile if one part fails.
Okay.
Because vital functions like food production or energy generation are designed in these modular loops, maybe a food loop serving 200 people, another semi-independent loop for the next 200 if one module faces a disruption, a pest problem, a solar panel issue. The others aren't necessarily crippled. Pods might have their own basic utility backups. Civic functions can be handled at different scales. This distribution means the system can absorb localized shocks, adapt, and recover without a total catastrophic collapse. It's designed for adaptation, not brittleness.
It avoids that classic too big to fail vulnerability. Okay. What about walkability as a resilience factor? That's less obvious, maybe.
Well, beyond the clear benefits of saving time and reducing stress, walkability builds crucial social resilience. When people are moving around their environment on foot regularly, they have far more spontaneous casual interactions.
Right, you bump into people.
You bump into people, you see your neighbors, you notice things happening in your shared spaces, you engage directly. This naturally builds social cohesion, mutual awareness, and trust, which are absolutely critical forms of resilience, especially when the community faces stress or needs to cooperate. It also, as they argue, helps recenter the human nervous system, reducing the cognitive load of constant high-speed navigation and promoting presence. It's about recovering time and using it for connection and clarity, which are buffers against stress.
Walkability as social infrastructure. I like that.
Yeah.
And feedback. How does that CFPS, the civic feedback and decision system, make the town genuinely adaptive?
The CFDS is designed to be the town's nervous system, constantly sensing, processing, and triggering responses. Unlike our current rigid, static urban systems that often only react after a crisis hits, a conscious town uses continuous feedback input from residents about their well-being and the quality of services, performance data from the physical systems like water and energy, environmental sensor data, evaluations of the civic role contracts to make ongoing incremental adjustments.
So it's learning all the time.
All the time. This feedback isn't just collected and put in a report. It's wired into the system to trigger recalibration before small issues become major problems. If metrics dip below a certain threshold, an adjustment process is automatically initiated. It transforms the town into a learning organism, one that evolves through constant data-informed adjustment rather than periodic crises.
So modularity provides robust, repeatable units. Walkability centers the human experience and builds social connection. And feedback makes the whole system intelligent and adaptive. That's the core functional logic we've covered in Part 1.
Exactly. And understanding that logic, how it should work, naturally leads to the question they tackle in Part 2. Why is something so fundamentally different supposedly necessary? Why do they argue our current systems are failing so badly?
Right. Part 2 starts with a pretty provocative title, The Collapse of the City. That's strong language.
It is, and the authors argue that despite their historical importance as centers of culture and innovation, cities, as they are currently structured and operate, are fundamentally failing the majority of people who live in them.
How so?
They see modern cities largely characterized by chronic issues: crippling congestion, pervasive anxiety, high levels of stress, widespread exhaustion. The very systems that are supposed to support life transportation, housing, governance, the economy often become the primary sources of friction, frustration, and an erosion of well-being.
And they believe this isn't just bad luck or mismanagement.
No, they trace it back to what they see as a structural design flaw rooted in centuries of extractive logic. Cities, historically and currently, were often built to extract value from labor, from land, think real estate speculation, from resources, from controlling movement, often via car dependency now. This underlying design, they argue, inevitably prioritizes throughput, accumulation, and control over human regeneration or ecological health. These weren't neutral design choices. They actively shaped the negative realities many experience in urban life today.
What are some of the specific negative outcomes they point to as evidence?
They mention the obvious ones we all recognize: soul-crushing commutes that steal hours from our lives, public systems that feel perpetually underfunded, slow, or broken, the relentless rise in the cost of living compared to incomes, and a deep, pervasive sense of civic alienation where individuals feel disconnected and powerless to influence their own environment. They essentially argue cities have lost their original purpose of supporting human flourishing and have become, for many, machines primarily geared towards economic throughput and resource extraction.
And they back this claim up with data or metrics.
Absolutely. They point to trends that are hard to ignore: rising rates of mental health challenges, specifically in urban populations, documented declines in social trust, persistent problems with pollution, widening economic inequality despite overall growth, and the visible decay of essential infrastructure in many places. These are presented not as isolated problems, but as systemic symptoms indicating the current model is fundamentally unsustainable for human well-being.
They do acknowledge the historical role cities played as hubs of innovation and culture, right?
They do, yes. But they seriously question the cost of that role today. They argue that innovation born out of a system built on stress, competition, and survival comes at an incredibly high human price. Density without genuine coherence just becomes disorder. Growth without fundamental redesign just leads towards collapse. They urge us to separate the historical myth of the city, the vibrant melting pot, from the often harsh reality for many inhabitants now.
And the pandemic, they suggest, really pulled back the curtain on these underlying weaknesses.
They frame the pandemic as the reveal, not the cause. It stripped away the usual momentum, the distractions, the constant busyness of urban life, and forced many people to confront the underlying dysfunctions.
That's so.
Lockdowns instantly highlighted the fragility of long supply chains and the lack of integrated local support systems. For many, it wasn't a rejection of culture or connection, but a sudden, stark realization that the fundamental structure of urban life, the dependence, the cost, the stress, simply wasn't working for them anymore. And crucially, cities largely didn't self-correct because the underlying design didn't change.
So the argument isn't that cities are inherently bad, but that the current dominant model is obsolete for widespread well-being.
Precisely. They state quite clearly, Cities aren't villains, but they are finished as the primary viable system for the future of human settlement if well-being is the goal. However, the ingenuity, the creativity, the energy that built cities can be redirected. We can learn from their successes and failures to build systems beyond them. The focus needs to shift from trying to patch the fundamentally broken model, maybe taller towers or faster trains, to building the necessary upgrade. Systems that feel whole, systems like the conscious town.
Okay, so the core argument is the city model's collapse is structural. It's evidenced by clear negative metrics. Attempts to fix it within the old framework have failed, and conscious towns represent the needed fundamental redesign.
Yes, that's the essence of why they believe such a radical departure is not just desirable, but necessary.
Moving on within part 2, they also analyze the alternatives that have emerged over time: smart cities, eco-villages, and suburbs. The argument here is that these are only partial solutions, each with significant, even fatal flaws.
Exactly. They see each of these models as addressing one particular aspect of the city's problems, but ultimately failing because they lack that crucial systemic integration and human-scale coherence. They don't solve the whole puzzle.
Okay, let's start with smart cities. What's the initial appeal, and where do the authors say they fall short?
The appeal is obvious. Efficiency. Using data, sensors, AI, algorithms to optimize everything: traffic flow, energy use, service delivery. It sounds like progress, right?
Yeah.
Very modern.
Yeah, smoother, faster.
But the fatal flaw, according to this document, is that smart cities tend to prioritize optimization and control over genuine human well-being and connection. They mistake efficiency for flourishing.
How does that play out?
It can lead to systems focused on surveillance rather than building trust. Decisions might be made by opaque algorithms rather than through transparent civic engagement. Residents risk becoming data points to be managed rather than active citizens participating in their community. Technology becomes the master, streamlining complexity perhaps, but not resolving the underlying issues of human disconnect, meaning, or belonging. Control, they argue, overshadows coherence.
Control over coherence. Yeah, that theme again. Okay, what about eco-villages? They seem to aim for the opposite connection: nature.
And they often achieve that. Eco-villages definitely offer valuable things many cities lack: a strong connection to nature, intentional community, simpler living, often local food production, a sense of shared meaning. These are real benefits.
That's the fatal flaw.
Often, it's a lack of robust, scalable system design for broader society. They might operate somewhat outside mainstream civic and economic structures, which provides a sanctuary for those involved, but doesn't offer a replicable blueprint for transforming society at large. Governance structures can sometimes be informal, maybe overly reliant on specific personalities or ideologies, making them vulnerable. Economic models can be fragile or hard to scale. They tend to be sanctuaries from the complexity of modern life, rather than integrated systems designed to handle that complexity ethically and effectively at scale.
So admirable in intent, maybe, but not necessarily a robust or universally applicable model. And suburbs, the classic escape from the city.
Suburbs emerged precisely as that escape, promising relief from the perceived chaos, noise, and density of the city, offering order, safety, personal space.
The suburban dream.
The suburban dream. But the fatal flaw, the authors argue, is fragmentation. Suburbs are often explicitly designed to separate the functions of life: home here, work way over there, shopping in a different zone, school somewhere else again.
Yeah, everything requires a drive.
Exactly. This enforced physical distance inherently undermines spontaneous community connection. It mandates car dependency, which eats up time, money, and impacts health. Public space often vanishes, replaced by private yards and controlled commercial areas. Civic identity can fade, replaced by a kind of consumer isolation. They might offer a certain kind of manageable structure on paper, but in practice they produce a profoundly disjointed and often isolating way of life. Structure perhaps, but lacking soul and deep systemic integration.
Okay, so summarizing their critique: smart cities optimize but lack human coherence. Eco-villages offer connection but lack scalable systems. Suburbs provide structure but create fragmentation. What's the common thread? What do the authors say all three of these alternatives ultimately miss?
They all miss true systemic integration at a human scale. None of them offer a complete, coherent civic system that weaves together all the essential layers: modular infrastructure, ethical governance, responsive feedback loops, a real wealth-based economy, a scalable culture of belonging, genuine ecological integration in a way that consistently supports holistic human well-being and adaptation. They tend to be models of subtraction, trying to remove perceived negatives of the city, like chaos or density or lack of nature, rather than models of synthesis actively building a coherent, integrated, positive whole. Conscious towns are presented as that necessary synthesis, designed to serve our biology, our community needs, and our collective intelligence all at once.
It really is about designing a whole new operating system for living together, not just patching the old one or creating niche escapes.
Exactly. The argument is we need systems designed to work with the grain of human nature and ecological reality, not systems that merely manage us, automate us, or allow us to retreat from complexity.
The final section in Part 2 addresses utopian traps and civic amnesia. Why is it important for them to explicitly state that conscious towns are not another utopian project?
Because the history of utopian projects is, well, mostly a history of failures. The authors are very clear that conscious towns are intended to be post-utopian.
Oh, what makes a typical utopia fail, in their view?
Several things. Utopias often rely on idealized conditions or assumptions about human nature. They assume everyone will just get along or that good intentions are enough to make things work. They frequently fail to design robust systems for handling disagreement, managing power dynamics constructively, or coping with stress and unforeseen challenges. This inherent lack of systemic realism makes them brittle. They shatter under pressure.
They're not built for the inevitable friction of real life.
Right.
Another common trap is dependency on a charismatic founder, a rigid central ideology, or a fixed founding myth. This might work for a while, but it inevitably leads to problems, leadership burnout or corruption, ideological schisms, disillusionment when reality doesn't match the myth. And crucially, they often lack mechanisms for managing disappointment or adapting when the original vision proves flawed.
Okay.
Conscious towns, by contrast, are designed specifically to handle stress and disagreement through things like red team protocols, clear contracts, and adaptive feedback systems. They explicitly reject charismatic leadership in favor of rotating, performance-based roles defined by the system, AAN. The system itself, designed for ongoing adaptation based on real-world feedback, is the vision, not a static ideal or a single person's dream.
The stability comes from the adaptive structure, not a personality or a fixed doctrine. What do they mean by civic amnesia? Civic amnesia, as they describe it, is the tendency to romanticize past forms of community like the idyllic image of a traditional village without fully integrating the lessons and capabilities of the modern world. It's trying to recreate old models without grappling with the complexities of scale, resource management, or the ethical integration of technology.
Like wanting the good old days without the downsides.
Kind of. Conscious towns aim for synthesis, not nostalgia. They seek to combine the timeless wisdom of human-scale patterns observed in the past, like walkability, strong local ties, connection to nature, with the best of post-industrial capabilities, systems thinking, ethical technology, regenerative design. It's about building forward, informed by the past, not trying to rebuild the past.
And the final utopian trap. Assuming good intentions are enough.
This is a really critical distinction they make. Intentions shape the tone and initial direction, but it's the systems that ultimately shape the results and behaviors over time. Utopias often assume that if everyone shares the same good values, functional systems will automatically follow. Conscious towns operate on the principle that trust and positive outcomes need to be made practical. They need to be designed into the system structure. Values are embedded in the governance contracts, the economic rules, the feedback loops, the physical layout. Norms are reinforced by visible data, transparent processes, and shared rituals. The system is built to function reliably even when individuals inevitably make mistakes or face challenges. It doesn't rely on everyone being perfect all the time.
So, to sum up this part, conscious towns are framed as post-utopian because they offer a structural, engineered response, not just a dream. They aim for adaptive clarity, not enforced harmony. They design governance explicitly, not avoid it. And they work with realistic human behavior, not idealized citizens.
Precisely. They represent a shift from speculative ideals to the practical engineering of a functioning, human-centric, adaptable social system.
Okay, that provides crucial context. Now let's move into part 3. System design. We understand the what and the why. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of how these towns are actually designed to function on the ground. Starting with the physical blueprint. Pod logic, superblocks, and walkable civic organs.
Right, and the key here is that the physical layout isn't just about aesthetics or traditional zoning. It's logic first, biology first, systems first. Every element of the structure is intended to actively support the core goals of clarity, efficient movement, interdependence, and human scale. The built environment itself is meant to reinforce the desired way of life.
So tell us more about the fundamental building block, the pod.
The pod is conceived as the smallest fully functional unit for daily life. It's designed to house roughly 80 to 150 residents. That number is chosen deliberately, aligning with those ideas like Dunbar's number, to foster genuine community where people can actually know each other.
Okay, small enough to feel connected. What's in a pod?
Within that pod, you'd find walkable housing clustered together. Integrated microagriculture, maybe community gardens, vertical setups, and local water loops, providing some basic resources right there. Shared food nodes are key. Think communal kitchens, small local cafes or markets, and access to other basic daily services, all ideally within that easy 5-minute walk.
So daily life essentials are contained.
Yes, each pod is designed for a degree of local autonomy, but also, crucially, for seamless integration into the larger town systems. They might even have their own localized data streams tracking internal metrics like resource use, surplus generation, or resident well-being feedback. They're like robust, interdependent cells making up the larger organism.
That size, 8150, really does feel like it hits that sweet spot for knowing your immediate neighbors. Okay, so pods are the micro-community level. What function do superblocks serve?
Superblocks act as the intermediate coordination layer. They connect multiple pods together. The source suggests typically 8 to 12 pods might form a superblock. This is the scale where you'd find services that aren't needed in every single pod, but still need to be easily accessible to maintain walkability.
Like what kind of services?
Things like secondary education spaces, maybe workshops or project labs, slightly larger civic health clinics, local energy substations or distribution points, connectors to any wider public transport systems, and interfaces for local governance places to provide feedback on contracts or participate in superblock level decisions.
Full walkable.
Yes, the ideal is that a superblock should also be walkable edge to edge within about 5 minutes. They provide crucial layered redundancies, maybe backup systems for food or energy shared across pods, and function as units for cooperation and coordination, bridging the gap between the individual pod and the town as a whole. They help balance the intimate scale with necessary shared infrastructure.
Got it. Connects the pods and provides the next level of service. Finally, the walkable civic organs. What are these?
These represent the town's core system-wide infrastructure, but again, the design principle is that they should be embedded and distributed throughout the town where appropriate, not concentrated in some remote central district or industrial zone.
So integrated into the living fabric.
Exactly. This includes the systems managing vital flows like water purification and distribution, larger-scale energy generation, maybe bigger solar arrays, geothermal plants, coordination points for regional food processing or links to surrounding agriculture, knowledge centers, or libraries, the main hubs for the governance systems, like where AAN contracts are managed, and importantly, dedicated public spaces for the town's key rituals, arts, and cultural life. They aren't conceived as static monuments, but as living systems, measurable, adaptive, service-oriented. They are the tangible embodiment of the town's integrated co-evolutionary nature.
Vital functions woven into the landscape, distributed for resilience.
Yeah.
Why does this specific physical structure, pods, superblocks, civic organs, work so effectively according to the authors?
It works because it's explicitly designed to overcome the spatial failures of traditional urbanism, the vast distances that fragment life, the dependency on centralized, often brittle systems, the inherent rigidity. By embedding feedback loops, modularity, and scale-appropriate logic directly into the physical blueprint, it creates an environment where that desired way of life, characterized by clarity, trust, and time wealth, becomes a more natural and achievable outcome of how the town is physically structured. Pods make daily life coherent and connected. Superblocks manage necessary interdependence efficiently, and civic organs ensure the vitality, resilience, and shared identity of the whole system. And each layer is designed with adaptation in mind.
It really is city planning reimagined from the ground up, with human well-being and systemic intelligence as the absolute core drivers, not afterthoughts.
Yeah, you could say the built environment is designed to function as a readable, walkable, repairable interface for the town's entire civic operating system. It physically manifests the logic.
Let's delve deeper into that operating system itself now, with the civic intelligence stack, system AAN, CSES, and CFDS. You've introduced these components, but let's really explore how this combination provides the town's capacity for learning, adaptation, and distributed intelligence.
Right. This stack is described as the town's layered intelligence system. And they make a point of clarifying it's not just about artificial intelligence in the usual sense, but about harnessing collective civic intelligence. This intelligence is derived from structured feedback, clearly defined contracts, measurable real-world metrics, and intentionally designed cooperation. It's what's supposed to allow the town to be self-evolving and constantly learning, with that intelligence distributed throughout the system, not concentrated at the top.
Okay, let's start with System AAN, the Adaptive Assignment Network. Can you really break down how this alternative to traditional politics and governance is supposed to function?
This is governance built fundamentally on performance and service, explicitly designed to bypass issues of power accumulation or popularity contests. Civic roles, whether it's managing the town's water recycling system, coordinating an educational program, stewarding a public park, whatever is needed, aren't filled through elections. They're defined by clear performance contracts.
Performance contracts.
Yes. These contracts specify the deliverables expected, the metrics that will be used to measure success, and they are for finite, agreed-upon terms. Individuals or teams take on these roles based on their ability to meet the contract's requirements. Feedback on their performance is collected continuously and transparently through the CFDS system.
And renewal isn't guaranteed.
Not at all. Renewal of a contract is based solely on demonstrated, verifiable performance against the agreed-upon outcomes and metrics. It's explicitly described as non-democratic, no voting for representatives, but also post-authoritarian. Power isn't concentrated, permanent, or based on personal authority. The structure provides accountability, but it's designed to prevent ego, ideology, or personal ambition from capturing the system. Leadership, such as it is, rotates based on demonstrated competence and the system's needs.
So you essentially earn the right to serve through competence in delivering results, and you're held accountable directly by the system's performance data and resident feedback. Okay, what else CSES, the Conscious Surplus Economic System? How does that function as an intelligence layer?
CSES is the town's economic intelligence layer, designed as a post-capitalist model that refines how value is understood, created, and circulated. The core goal is to eliminate extractive practices and align economic activity directly with ethical principles and collective well-being.
What are the key mechanisms that make it conscious or intelligent?
Several interacting components. The capped ROI we mentioned limits financial returns for external investors, ensuring that capital serves the town's long-term health rather than prioritizing maximum short-term extraction. This directs investment towards genuinely regenerative projects.
Right.
The surplus sharing mechanism means that when the town's integrated systems generate a genuine surplus, more energy than needed, excess food, etc., that value isn't just privatized or lost, it's tracked, often via a real wealth ledger, and the benefits are systematically reinvested back into the community commons, perhaps lowering costs, funding new amenities, or strengthening the UBA.
The universal basic assets, that sounds like a core intelligence feature too.
Absolutely. By guaranteeing access to essentials, housing, energy, food, care, UBA provides a foundational layer of security. This fundamentally changes the economic calculation for residents, freeing up cognitive resources and time from pure survival pressure, allowing for more participation, learning, and contribution based on interest rather than desperation. It builds resilience and enables higher-level functions.
And the time credit economy.
That acts as a local medium of exchange that values contributions often ignored by the traditional economy, care work, mentoring, civic participation, environmental stewardship. It makes these vital contributions visible and exchangeable within the community, reinforcing pro-social behavior and strengthening local loops.
So the intelligence of CSES lies in its ability to align economic incentives with well-being, track real value creation, not just financial, ensure basic needs, and circulate surplus for collective benefit.
Yep.
And its success is measured by that real wealth metric.
Yes, exactly. Real wealth, the aggregate clarity, time, trust, health, ecological vitality is the primary economic dashboard indicator, constantly monitored via the CFDS. This ensures the economy remains aligned with its purpose, serving lives.
Okay, and the final piece of the intelligence stack, CFDS, the Civic Feedback and Decision System. You call it the nervous system. How does it enable learning and adaptation?
Precisely because it's a continuous, multi-directional feedback loop. It's constantly gathering information from multiple sources simultaneously. Input from residents, maybe through simple, regular check-ins on their dashboards about their perceived time wealth, the quality of services they're receiving, or just general sentiment.
Okay.
Performance data directly from the physical systems, energy output versus consumption, water quality readings, food production yields, waste recycling rates. environmental sensor beta, and crucial feedback on the performance of the civic roles operating under AAN contracts. Are they meeting their deliverables? What's the resident experience of their service?
And this data isn't just filed away.
No, that's the key. It's actively processed and integrated, and it's designed to automatically trigger recalibration mechanisms when certain indicators fall below predefined thresholds. If trust metrics dip in a certain superblock, or energy efficiency drops, or wait times for care increase, the system flags it and initiates a process to diagnose and address the issue. The authors stress this is shared sensing, not top-down surveillance. It requires transparency, consent, and participation. Its core purpose is to enable the town to learn from failure and success in near real time, to evolve and improve continuously without needing a major crisis to force change.
It makes the entire town a responsive, living entity capable of learning from its own experience. So why does this whole stack AAN, CSCS, CFDS work so powerfully together?
Because each layer intrinsically reinforces the others, creating a virtuous cycle. AAN ensures that governance roles are accountable to the performance metrics tracked by CFDS. CSCS ensures that economic activity is geared towards building the real wealth measured by CFDS, and the UBA provides the stable foundation necessary for the meaningful participation that CFDS relies on. And CFDS provides the essential real-time data and qualitative input needed for AAN contracts to be meaningful, for CSCS surplus to be allocated wisely, and for the entire system to steer effectively towards its goals. It's designed to remove the speculation, inertia, hidden agendas, and rigid hierarchies of old systems without eliminating necessary structure. It's civic intelligence in action. Learning, adjusting, regenerating, hopefully without constant crisis.
It really is a complete integrated operating system for a community. Okay, let's talk about the soul of this system, the culture engine. The source material says culture is intentionally engineered for coherence. How do they propose to actively build that shared operating system for meaning, trust, and belonging?
They view culture not as an afterthought or a random byproduct of people living together, but as absolutely essential infrastructure. It's the invisible framework, the shared understanding, the emotional resonance that holds everything together. It provides the trust, identity, and cohesion that allow all those modular systems and governance structures to actually function smoothly. And yes, they argue it needs to be consciously cultivated through specific design elements woven into the fabric of the town.
Okay, starting with symbols. How are they used functionally?
Symbols are employed as practical, information-rich signals throughout the town's environment and systems. They aren't just decoration. Think about clear, easily recognizable emblems designating different types of civic contracts or roles. Maybe intuitive color systems indicating the real-time status of local resource loops, like water recycling levels or energy surplus. Simple iconography could guide behavior in shared spaces or signal the purpose of different zones without needing lengthy text or complex digital interfaces.
Like a visual shorthand for the town's values and functions.
Exactly. The goal is to make the environment instantly legible, to reduce cognitive load and friction, and to communicate shared values and operational status visually and intuitively. This helps build trust because the system feels transparent and understandable.
Makes sense. What about rituals? How are they integrated?
Rituals are seen as absolutely key for anchoring collective rhythm, creating moments of shared presence, and marking important transitions. They provide shared experiences that build collective memory, reinforce values, and foster a sense of belonging.
What kind of rituals are we talking about?
The source mentions examples like a possible weekly communal meal where surplus food from local production is shared, seasonal festivals that might coincide with cycles of nature or the town's own recalibration cycles, perhaps regular public gatherings for expressing gratitude, acknowledging contributions, or collectively reviewing system performance dashboards. These rituals ground the community in shared time and place, give life rhythm and meaning, and importantly, ensure the town systems don't feel cold, anonymous, or purely transactional. They reinforce the underlying why.
Providing those regular touch points for shared experience and meaning. And the third element, archetypes.
Archetypes like Emma the Steward, Rosa the Builder, and Cincinnato the Leader in Withdrawal are presented as helpful cultural models or patterns for understanding identity and contribution within the town. They aren't rigid job descriptions or fixed social classes. Instead, they offer recognizable pathways or styles of engagement.
How do they help?
They help residents understand and articulate different ways they might contribute their unique energy, skills, and passions to the town's collective life. Emma might represent guidance, clarity, hospitality, pattern recognition. Rosa embodies tangible action, building systems, iteration. Cincinnato represents duty-led service with humility and graceful exit. They provide clarity on what different kinds of civic engagement look like and how they are valued within the culture.
So they offer frameworks for people to find their way to contribute meaningfully. And presumably all of this, symbols, rituals, archetypes, works together to build civic trust.
That's the ultimate goal. Civic trust isn't just hoped for, it's seen as cultural infrastructure that is built incrementally through all these small, consistent signals. A shared, understandable visual language, symbols, predictable, positive, meaningful shared experiences, rituals, clear pathways for contribution and recognition, archetypes, and an overall emotional tone of care and transparency embedded in the environment and interactions. When these work together, trust becomes more tangible, alignment feels more natural, and participation can become a source of intrinsic motivation and even joy, not just obligation.
The culture provides the essential emotional and social resilience that makes the whole system hang together.
Precisely. Systems based purely on logic, rules, and contracts can be brittle. Culture provides the human dimension, the sense of shared story, purpose, and mutual reliance that sustains the community, especially through inevitable challenges or disagreements. It's what prevents exit, fracture, and burnout. It's not optional. It makes the whole system emotionally sustainable.
That focus on preventing burnout and sustaining participation leads perfectly into the next specific design element. Leadership without ego, built around the Cincinnato framework. This seems like a direct response to the problems often seen with traditional personality-driven leadership.
Absolutely. The authors critique traditional leadership models often based on charisma, power consolidation, indefinite terms, or partisan politics as inherently unstable, prone to ego-driven decisions, and damaging to long-term trust and system health. Conscious towns, they argue, require a fundamentally different approach, where leadership is understood purely as temporary, accountable service based on duty, delivering measurable outcomes, and culminating in a structured, dignified exit.
And this is inspired by the historical figure of Cincinnatus, the Roman who supposedly left his farm to lead, did the job, and then went straight back to his farm.
Exactly. That story serves as the archetype. It embodies the principle that holding a position of civic responsibility is a temporary duty undertaken for the common good, not a career path, a status symbol, or an opportunity for permanent power accumulation. Roles within the AAN system are conceived as finite civic contracts, activated by a specific identified system need or goal, not by personal ambition.
What are the specific problems with personality-centric governance that this model aims to avoid?
They identify several key issues. Personality-driven leadership often creates bottlenecks. Critical decisions depend on one individual's availability, mood, or biases. It introduces volatility. The system's direction can swing wildly based on who's in charge. It frequently leads to messy succession crises. It can blur the lines between the leader's personal identity and the health of the system, making objective evaluation and accountability difficult. All of this erodes trust, hinders adaptation, and weakens feedback loops. The conscious town design systematically rejects this by making the role, the contract, and the system central, not the individual currently filling the role.
Okay, so the Cincinnato model means leadership roles are triggered by a clear system need, become with a predefined term or objective, and performance is evaluated transparently by the CFDS metrics.
That's the core mechanism. You step into a specific civic role because the system requires that function to be performed effectively. The contract details the expectations and duration. Your performance is tracked against agreed-upon, visible metrics. At the conclusion of the term, or upon meeting the objective, you formally step down and return to being a regular resident, albeit one with valuable experience. This creates a healthy, predictable civic rhythm. Enter service, fulfill the duty with clear purpose, exit gracefully, and reintegrate fully into the community.
And the civic role architecture you mentioned earlier supports this structure.
Yes. Every significant civic role within the AAN framework is designed with this in mind. It has predefined goals and scope. It has clear reporting lines and integrated feedback channels, often linking directly to resident feedback dashboards via the CFDS. Accountability is primarily to the health and performance of the system the role serves, not to building a personal brand or power base. The roles are designed to be fillable by different competent individuals over time, making them replaceable and reversible, which prevents stagnation and avoids creating single points of failure dependent on one indispensable person.
The transition protocols also seem really important for making that graceful exit actually work culturally.
They are vital for reinforcing the underlying values and ensuring the system doesn't just revert to personality politics. Exits from significant roles are designed to be public, honored, and seen as essential transitions, not failures or demotions. There might be a formal system review documenting the role's performance and lessons learned during the term. Public recognition for the service rendered. Perhaps a small ritual acknowledging the individual's transition back to resident status. And potentially an optional, clearly defined advisor role for a limited time, but explicitly without any ongoing command authority.
Okay.
This whole process visibly reinforces the cultural norms. Service is temporary, it's valued, it's regenerative for both the individual and the system, and absolutely no one is permanently above or indispensable to the system.
What are the main benefits the authors claim for this model of leaderless leadership or leadership without ego?
They argue it creates stability without the risk of stagnation or inertia. It allows for authority based on demonstrated competence and clear deliverables without catering to ego or charisma. It provides clear direction based on system needs and data without creating dependence on a single individual. And crucially, it builds deep systemic trust because the processes are transparent, the accountability is clear, and the structure itself guards against manipulation by personalities. Service becomes safer and more attractive for a wider range of people because it's not a winner-take-all career capture. It's about contributing meaningfully for a defined period.
And this is where the Cincinnati archetype becomes a living part of the culture.
Exactly. The archetype isn't just a nice story, it's actively woven into the town's culture through narratives, perhaps in educational materials, maybe even visually represented. It sets clear expectations from the moment people integrate into the town about how leadership functions. It helps make accountable, respectful, temporary service part of the community's shared DNA.
Okay, we've covered the fundamental system design in quite some detail. Now, in Part 4, the authors shift focus to system proof. How do they demonstrate that this complex, integrated vision is not just theoretically sound, but actually possible, and maybe even, as they provocatively suggest, inevitable? It starts with having metrics that matter.
Right. Because making grand claims about well-being isn't enough. A system designed for well-being must be able to prove it delivers using metrics that are directly relevant to human experience and are integrated right into the system's architecture. They explicitly reject traditional metrics like GDP growth or real estate speculation as primary indicators because these often mask or even contribute to declining quality of life. The core question is, are people actually living better lives here, measurably?
And their flagship metric seems to be time wealth. Can you elaborate on that?
Time wealth is positioned as perhaps the scarcest and most valuable resource in modern life. It's not just about the sheer quantity of free time, but crucially, the quality of that time. How much of our time is spent in meaningful, restorative, high-quality states like focused work, deep connection with others, creative flow, genuine rest, presence in nature versus time lost to stressful commutes, bureaucratic hassles, fragmented attention, or anxious scrolling.
Okay, quality over quantity.
Yes. And the entire conscious town system is designed to actively maximize time wealth. Walkability drastically cuts commute time. Integrated services and local loops reduce the time spent coordinating fragmented aspects of life. Streamlined, feedback-driven governance aims to minimize bureaucratic friction. The design intentionally works to recover time previously lost to systemic inefficiency and stress, making it available for conscious living, connection, and contribution.
It's not just about saving a few minutes here and there. It's about fundamentally restructuring daily rhythms to reclaim significant chunks of meaningful life each week. What is GHPI?
DHPI stands for the General Human Prosperity Index. This is conceived as their core multidimensional measure of the town's overall collective well-being, going far beyond simple economic indicators.
What dimensions does it include?
It typically includes metrics related to things like residents' reported mental clarity and low stress levels, indicators of physical vitality, activity levels, access to healthy food, measures of civic trust and participation, access to and engagement with lifelong learning opportunities, and the town's measured regenerative surplus is it producing more clean energy, healthy soil, social connection than it consumes.
And this isn't just a report published once a year.
No, the idea is that it's a live, visible dashboard, accessible to residents and civic stewards, perhaps updated seasonally or even more frequently. It functions as real-time operational feedback. If the GHPI drops in a specific area, say, civic trust metrics decline in a particular superblock, it's designed to trigger an alert within the CFDS, initiating a process to diagnose the cause and implement corrective actions. It's not just branding. It's a core diagnostic and steering tool for the entire system.
A living pulse check for the town's health. And the real wealth ledger, what does that track?
Real wealth, in their definition, is the community's aggregate surplus capacity. And crucially, this isn't just financial capital. It encompasses biological wealth, healthy ecosystems, clean air and water, emotional wealth, resilience, joy, low anxiety, social wealth, high trust, strong networks, cooperation, ecological wealth, regenerative resource flows, and even things like knowledge capital. The real wealth ledger is the system used to track this multidimensional surplus, how it's generated, how it's distributed, who receives benefits, who contributes, how regeneration happens, how local value loops are performing, and how non-monetary capital like beauty, coherence, and clarity is being cultivated.
And residents can see this.
Ideally, yes. Residents should have visibility into the real wealth ledger, allowing them to see how their own participation and consumption align with the collective health and regenerative capacity of the town. It makes the creation and sharing of holistic value transparent.
So these metrics, time wealth, GHPI, real wealth ledger, aren't just abstract calculations. They actively drive the design, operation, and adaptation of the town.
Precisely. They are baked into the operational logic from the start. They inform decisions about resource allocation, infrastructure priorities, governance adjustments, cultural initiatives, everything. They function as essential alignment tools, constantly ensuring the system stays true to its stated purpose of supporting life and generating clarity, trust, and time wealth for its inhabitants. They provide the proof that the system is working as intended.
Let's move to risk, resilience, and repeatability. Given the complexities and uncertainties of the world, how is this system designed to withstand disruption, recover effectively, and perhaps even get stronger through challenges?
Resilience in a conscious town isn't treated as an optional add-on or just an emergency response plan. It's deeply integrated into the core design across multiple dimensions: physical, digital, civic, ecological. It's conceived as proactive, continuous, and multi-layered, not just something you activate when disaster strikes.
Okay, starting with redundancy by design, how does that work?
It involves intentionally building overlap and backup capacity into vital systems. Water, energy, and food systems are designed with multiple layers and modular loops. For instance, individual pods might have basic rainwater harvesting and solar panels, while also being connected to a superblock-level microgrid and water recycling system, which in turn might connect to a larger town-level source or storage. Civic functions are designed to be distributed across different scales or have adaptive teams ready to step in. This layered redundancy prevents single points of failure. If one component is disrupted, others can often compensate, allowing the system to flex, adapt, and recover without total collapse.
Building in that tolerance for failure. What about black swan logic? How do they prepare for the truly unpredictable?
They operate on the assumption that unpredictable, high-impact events, major political shifts, sophisticated cyber attacks, pandemics, ecological tipping points, extreme weather are not anomalies to be ignored, but baseline conditions of the modern world that the system must be designed to navigate.
How do you design for the unknown?
Through proactive measures like regular red team simulations, where dedicated teams actively try to break or disrupt the terror systems to identify vulnerabilities. Through rigorous scenario planning for plausible futures, by ensuring data sovereignty, keeping essential operational data local and protected, by designing critical systems to have offline operational capabilities if digital networks fail, and by fostering that bioregional modularity so disruptions in one area are less likely to cascade globally. It's about building the inherent capacity for intelligent, adaptive response when the unexpected inevitably happens.
Preparing for shocks is part of the standard operating procedure. Cyber resilience and data sovereignty seem especially critical today.
Absolutely. The digital infrastructure supporting the town is envisioned to be decentralized wherever feasible, utilizing encrypted identity systems. Prioritizing local-first data storage, meaning essential data, isn't solely reliant on vulnerable external cloud servers controlled by third parties. Ensuring audit trails for any AI systems used in governance or resource management. And designing for graceful degradation, meaning if digital systems are partially compromised or go offline, essential services can still function at a basic level. This protects the town and its residents from external manipulation, mass surveillance, and crippling dependency on potentially fragile global networks.
And what about the human dimension of resilience? Emotional and civic resilience.
This is recognized as equally important. The system's design aims to actively buffer collective stress. Clear, predictable role transitions and respectful exit rituals, like the Cincinnati model, reduce the anxiety often associated with leadership changes. Established cultural rituals and shared narratives provide anchors of meaning and reinforce collective purpose during times of disruption. The physical design might incorporate trauma-informed principles in public spaces. The idea is that a town, to be truly resilient, must protect the internal psychological well-being and social cohesion of its residents, not just its physical infrastructure.
And finally, repeatability through modularity enables resilience to scale.
Yes, this is crucial for the vision's potential impact, because the fundamental system logic, the ANCSES-CFDS stack, the pod superblock structure, the core cultural principles, is designed to be modular and adaptable. It can theoretically be applied and iterated upon in diverse contexts, geographies, and resource settings. You scale the resilience of the network by replicating these inherently resilient modular nodes, not by building one single, massive, potentially fragile megastructure. The resilience is embedded in the repeatable pattern, allowing the model to spread and connect globally while maintaining its core integrity.
It's not just about building one resilient town, but fostering a potentially global network of interconnected, resilient communities operating on similar principles.
That's the larger vision, yes. The system is designed with replication and network effects in mind.
Next section is system proof. Finance without extraction. This seems critical, as traditional finance is often seen as a major driver of the problems conscious towns aim to solve. How do they structure their economic model to avoid those pitfalls?
They start from the premise that traditional financial models, often driven by maximizing short-term profit, speculation, and ever-increasing debt, are fundamentally incompatible with building truly regenerative, equitable, and resilient communities. These models inevitably lead to systems designed for financial extraction rather than nurturing life. So conscious towns require a completely different financial architecture where value is intentionally created, circulated, and reinvested locally, guided by ethical principles and the measurable goal of increasing real wealth, not just monetary return.
What's the core problem they identify with how most cities or developments are financed today?
They argue that under traditional models, cities and land effectively become financialized assets. Land is treated primarily as a commodity for speculation, not a shared commons supporting life. Development decisions are driven by maximizing investor ROI, often leading to exclusionary designs, unaffordable housing, and environmental shortcuts. Rent-seeking behavior extracting value without creating commensurate underlying value becomes rampant. Growth is pursued almost regardless of the social or ecological costs. And debt often becomes the default operating model, locking communities into cycles of extraction and fragility. Conscious towns explicitly reject this entire logic.
So what does their alternative, the conscious economic architecture, look like? How does it counteract this extractive tendency?
It's built on several interconnected mechanisms designed to align finance with the town's core values. One key element might be DAO-led civic capital. This means decisions about allocating capital for significant town projects could be managed through decentralized autonomous organizations, using transparent, community-governed processes rather than being controlled by opaque external financiers.
Okay, more transparent capital allocation.
Then there's the capped ROI principle we discussed. By setting clear, reasonable limits on the financial returns external investors can receive, it ensures that investment acts as patient capital supporting the town's long-term health and regeneration rather than fuel for rapid extraction. It attracts investors aligned with the town's ethical goals.
Right, changes the investor incentive.
The Universal Basic Assets, UBA component, is also fundamental to the economic architecture. By ensuring everyone's basic needs are met, it creates a stable foundation, reduces desperation-driven economic behavior, and ensures the economy serves human security first. And the emphasis on local loops and surplus trusts ensures that value generated within the town primarily circulates internally. Surplus resources or funds are tracked via the real wealth ledger and reinvested back into the commons, strengthening the local system rather than leaking out to external owners. The time credit system further reinforces this internal circulation by valuing local contributions.
It sounds like the entire economic system is being rewired to prioritize internal health, circulation, and well-being over external profit extraction and accumulation.
That's exactly the goal. It's about ensuring the economy serves the town's stated purpose of generating real wealth, rather than the town becoming subservient to the demands of an external, extractive financial system.
And how do they address issues like land speculation and gentrification, which plague so many successful places?
Through mechanisms like community land trusts. Land within the town is typically held collectively by a trust, removing it from the speculative market. Access to housing or spaces isn't determined solely by market price or conventional credit scores, but might be linked to participation in the town's systems, contribution via time credits, or needs assessed through the CFDS. This structure prevents the common gentrification cycle where rising external property values displace the very residents who contribute to the town's success. As the town thrives, the benefits are designed to be shared by the inhabitants, not primarily captured by outside landowners or developers.
How is the initial funding for building or transforming a place into a conscious town envisioned? Where does the seed capital come from?
The source material suggests exploring hybrid models, especially for early-stage projects. This could involve partnering with aligned investors, individuals, or funds specifically seeking long-term, ethical, regenerative returns, not just maximum short-term profit. Utilizing civic DAOs to raise and manage community-governed funds. Working with regenerative syndicates focused on measurable social and ecological impact alongside financial return. Tapping into place-based funds dedicated to local community development, possibly using capped reward tokens or other innovative instruments. The crucial element isn't the specific source, but how the value generated is structured, retained, and shared to ensure that any capital entering the system reinforces the town's core mission of enhancing life, rather than setting up future mechanisms for extraction.
It's finance fundamentally redesigned to be a tool for building regenerative capacity, not just extracting monetary value.
Exactly. Finance becomes grounded in the logic of use, service, and shared multidimensional wealth creation.
Now, this all sounds incredibly ambitious, maybe even theoretical. But Part 4 concludes by grounding it in a real-world origin story. From La Tejedora Distrito Creativo to a global network. This suggests the blueprint didn't just emerge from thin air.
That's one of the most compelling parts of their narrative. They emphasize that every complex system starts with a signal, an initial experiment or observation. And for the Conscious Town's blueprint, that originating signal emerged, perhaps somewhat unexpectedly, from the experience of retrofitting an abandoned textile factory and warehouse complex in Cumbaya, Ecuador. This project became known as La Tejedora Distrito Creativo, the Weaver Creative District.
Okay, it started as a creative district.
Yes, initially the focus was on creating affordable workspaces, studios, and cultural venues. But something interesting happened as the place came alive.
What was that unexpected outcome?
People didn't just come there to work or attend events, they started expressing a desire to actually live there. The simple, practical acts of retrofitting these old buildings, creating genuinely walkable connections between them, embedding small pockets of local food production or community kitchens, fostering interaction through shared spaces, it inadvertently created an environment where daily life felt, well, better, more connected, less stressful, more inherently meaningful than the surrounding suburban sprawl.
Interesting. So it wasn't initially planned as a full residential town.
Not exactly, but the instincts behind the retrofit, reusing existing structures sustainably, creating human scale density and mixed use, prioritizing interaction over separation, generated the core signals of livability. The project leaders observed this emergent desire for people to integrate their whole lives there.
So the system logic actually emerged from observing what was working organically on the ground.
Precisely. They saw firsthand that designing for walkability wasn't just about convenience. It demonstrably fostered interaction and built social trust. They saw that having daily needs in close proximity didn't just save time, it reduced friction and increased joy. They saw how shared rituals, events, and the emerging narrative of the place created a strong sense of identity and belonging. People were naturally bringing their lives, their families, their social activities into this environment because it felt good. This observation revealed a deeper potential. This wasn't just a successful creative district, it was a working prototype for a profoundly more livable civic system.
And that crucial observation sparked the transition from thinking about a creative district to the much broader concept of a conscious town.
Yes. The realization dawned that La Tejedora, perhaps accidentally at first, had tapped into some fundamental principles for building a place where life genuinely works better for humans. They saw the unmet potential to intentionally integrate all the other systems necessary for a complete and thriving life, not just creative work, but housing designed for community, reliable local food and energy systems, new forms of governance, integrated care and education. The initial cultural space concept evolved into the blueprint for a full civic system. The early experiments with economic zones informed the development of trust-based contracts, a precursor to ANCSC's ideas. The architectural choices started being seen not just as design, but as ways to reflect an underlying ontological coherence. The seed planted at La Tejedora contained the DNA for the entire conscious town model.
And the core principles that solidified from that La Tejedora experience are the same ones we find embedded throughout the blueprint.
Yes, those early hard-won insights became foundational. Things like walkability with purpose, recognizing its power to recover time and build social trust. Civic proximity, codifying the value of that 5-minute access to daily needs. Ritual as infrastructure, understanding that shared rhythms are essential, not optional. Beauty as trust logic, acknowledging that a cared-for, aesthetically coherent environment signals psychological safety and builds trust. Narrative cohesion, using shared stories, symbols, names, and roles as part of the town's functional architecture. These weren't just abstract ideals added later. They were observed patterns of what made La Tejedora feel vibrant, functional, and desirable, and they proved to be transferable principles that could be scaled and adapted into the full conscious town architecture for new contexts.
And this real-world experience directly informed the practical strategy for global replication, conscious townification.
Exactly. La Tejedora was the living proof that you don't necessarily need a blank slate and massive upfront capital to start building this way. Conscious townification is the term they use for the strategy of taking existing environments, struggling neighborhoods, underutilized university campuses, old industrial districts, even declining rural towns, and systematically adapting them using the full conscious town system logic. It's about retrofitting places with this integrated civic intelligence, these regenerative systems, and human-scale design principles. It focuses on activating the latent potential already present in places rather than relying solely on demolition and new construction. La Tejedora itself was, in essence, the original conscious townification project.
That makes the whole vision feel significantly more accessible and potentially impactful. It's not just about building brand new utopian enclaves somewhere remote.
It really opens the door for people, communities, even existing institutions to begin implementing these principles right where they are, adapting the logic to their specific context. It's presented as a much more grounded and scalable path forward.
And that leads us directly into the final part, Part V, system invitation. Now that we understand the what, why, how, and the proof, who is this blueprint actually intended for? Who are they inviting to participate?
The authors are quite explicit that this isn't aimed at some narrow, elite group of planners, tech gurus, or utopian dreamers. The invitation is broad. It's fundamentally for anyone who senses that our current systems are failing us and who is ready, willing, and looking for practical ways to actively participate in imagining and building something better.
Okay, starting with the average person citizens. What's the invitation for them?
This is framed as being for the everyday person who simply wants life to feel like it works again. Someone who's tired of the constant stress, the draining commute, the lack of trust in institutions, the feeling that time is always scarce and fragmented. You don't need to be an expert in systems design or urban planning. You just need that basic human desire for a place where your time is respected, your environment feels safe and nurturing, your body feels restored. Maybe your kids can grow up with more clarity and connection. The blueprint offers a vision of a walkable system that reliably meets essential needs within a supportive civic environment, designed to foster belonging without leading to burnout or requiring escape. It's designed fundamentally for the human being first.
What about professional builders and developers, for instance?
The invitation for them is to recognize the limitations and, frankly, the increasing unsustainability of the old development models, the reliance on speculative finance, the creation of car-dependent sprawl, the social disconnection often baked into conventional projects. Conscious towns offer them a coherent, modular, scalable framework for building places that have genuine long-term value because they offer superior livability. It provides metrics beyond just profit, a financial model designed for regeneration, not just extraction, and delivers a civic product that meets a deep, growing demand for quality of life. It's presented as the future of architecture and development for those seeking lasting value and positive impact.
And educators and designers, how can they engage?
For anyone involved in shaping learning, growth, or the design of systems and experiences, this offers a compelling alternative context. Conscious towns envision education as embedded in life, inherently lifelong, place-based, and cooperative, rather than isolated in institutions. Educators are invited to redesign learning experiences, integrate them into the town's daily rhythms and challenges, connect content directly to local needs and bioregional patterns, and potentially take on roles as cultural stewards. Designers of spaces, systems, interfaces can apply their skills to enhance clarity, facilitate feedback, build trust, and create environments that truly support human flourishing.
And finally, civic stewards, people drawn to leadership or community organizing.
For those who feel called to system leadership but are wary of traditional power structures, ego-driven politics, or ineffective bureaucracies, this offers a different path. Conscious towns provide clearly defined civic roles based on accountability, measurable service, and transparent processes through AAN, DIO, CFDS. The invitation is to step into leadership as a form of stewardship, a responsibility to the health and evolution of the system, not a route to personal power or status. Stewardship becomes a valued, renewable function within the community's operating system.
And the archetype-based onboarding is meant to help people find their specific pathway into these roles.
Yes, that's the idea. Using the cultural archetypes like Emma, steward, Rosa, builder, Cincinnato, leader in withdrawal, during integration or onboarding can help individuals identify where their natural inclinations, skills, and passions might best align with the needs and opportunities within the town. They aren't rigid boxes, but starting points or patterns to help people find their unique civic path and evolve with it.
So the invitation is genuinely broad, offering different entry points and modes of engagement depending on who you are. And crucially, the next section emphasizes how to start where you are. It doesn't require waiting for some massive top-down initiative.
This is absolutely key to the practical, action-oriented nature of the blueprint. It's designed to be fractal and modular. You don't need vast tracts of empty land or billions in venture capital to begin implementing the logic. It can start small, it's designed to adapt to existing conditions, and it grows organically, fueled by local intelligence and participation. It's an action-first framework.
What's the suggested first step? Begin with observation.
Yes. Before jumping in to change things, deeply understand the system you're currently part of, even perhaps especially if it feels broken. Observe how people actually gather and interact. Notice where the flows work and where the friction points are. Listen to the local stories. Map the informal networks of trust and support. Identify the existing civic spine, the natural pathways and hubs of community life. The goal is to diagnose accurately and identify opportunities to upgrade or reconnect what's already there, not necessarily impose something entirely new from scratch.
Then activate the micropod. What does that look like in practice?
This is about implementing the smallest viable unit of change that demonstrates the core principles. It could be focused on a single city block, a shared apartment building, a co-located group of complementary services. The key is to intentionally integrate at least two core functions within a walkable radius. Maybe a neighborhood cafe that also hosts regular civic labs or skill-sharing workshops, a housing cooperative that incorporates a significant community garden and composting system, a building that co-locates childcare and elder care facilities with shared resources. It demonstrates the viability of integrated, walkable, local loops and serves as a tangible invitation for others to see and participate.
Use the flip. This refers to that conscious identification approach.
Exactly. It emphasizes retrofitting existing, often underutilized spaces rather than always building new. Take an old warehouse, a vacant school building, a neglected community hall, and adapt it using conscious town principles. Reinforce walkability around it. Introduce a simple local feedback loop, maybe a physical board, or a simple digital tool for people using the space to give input, a basic CFDS node. Embed symbolic cues that signal the new intention, maybe through murals, clear signage using the town's visual language, establishing small rituals around its use, and perhaps launch the renewed space with simple shared agreements or contracts for how it will be managed and used collectively. This often bypasses the need for complex political permissions and focuses on local alignment, clear rules, and demonstrating visible, positive impact quickly.
Create the participation loops. How do you do that effectively?
By designing simple, clear, accessible mechanisms for people to genuinely engage and contribute in ways that feel meaningful and low risk. This could involve experimenting with time-based credits for volunteering or local service exchanges, introducing small-scale rotating steward roles with very defined scopes and terms for specific projects or spaces, setting up public dashboards displaying key local metrics like energy savings or participation rates, establishing those small, regular rituals that build connection. When participation is structured, transparent, the feedback is visible, and people feel their contribution is valued and useful, perhaps linked back to metrics like time wealth, engagement tends to grow organically. People need to feel heard, protected, and effective.
Connect to the mesh. What does that involve?
As these local micropods or conscious countification initiatives start to mature and demonstrate success, they benefit immensely from connecting with the broader global network of similar projects. This network serves as a platform for sharing practical insights, effective tools like open source software for CFDS or AAN, legal templates for land trusts or contracts, system upgrades, and collective learning from different contexts, like scenario planning results. The source mentions specific protocols like CSCS, AAN, CFDS, the archetype kits as being part of this shared infrastructure. It means you're not inventing everything alone in isolation. Every node contributes to and benefits from the collective intelligence of the network.
And a final crucial piece of advice. Avoid the big launch trap.
Yes. Don't wait for the perfect, comprehensive plan, the ideal undeveloped site, or the massive funding round before starting. Don't aim for a single, grand, all-or-nothing public launch that puts immense pressure on delivering a finished product. The advice is to evolve iteratively. Start with what you have, where you are. Prove the value of the core principles at a small, manageable scale. Document rigorously what works and what doesn't in your context. Share those learnings openly. The town, or the transformed place, emerges organically, pod by pod, loop by loop, adaptation by adaptation, through continuous activation and learning, not from a top-down master plan executed all at once. It's about nurturing a living system into existence, not constructing a static monument.
Conscious towndification, then, really is presented as the most practical and scalable model for adapting existing places globally using this logic.
Yes, it's positioned as the primary method for converting existing environments, whether they are urban districts, university campuses, industrial zones, or even suburban neighborhoods, into functioning conscious town systems. It's about strategically retrofitting them with the necessary civic logic, regenerative systems, and human-scale design principles. It focuses on activating the often untapped latent potential within places through targeted interventions and a fundamental shift in the underlying operating logic, aiming for maximum alignment with minimal disruptive demolition. It's framed as how the core ideas can realistically spread and take root worldwide.
What are the core logic layers that need to be embedded during conscious towndification?
It's essentially about weaving the 4 key layers of the conscious town blueprint into an existing context. First, spatial transformation enhancing walkability, introducing modularity in how spaces are used, creating more shared civic spaces. Second, systemic intelligence gradually introducing elements of the governance, AAN principles, economic CSCS principles, and feedback CFDS loop systems, even if starting very simply. Third, the symbolic layer consciously adding rituals, meaningful symbols, visual cues, and perhaps introducing the archetypes to build shared identity and coherence. And fourth, participation architecture, creating new, clear roles, responsibilities, and feedback channels that allow residents to actively engage and co-evolve the system. This can happen incrementally in phases, starting small, but the shift in the underlying logic across all these layers is what defines the transformation.
Can you walk us through those potential phases? Phase 1, mapping the civic spine.
Right. Every existing place, no matter how fragmented, has some kind of civic spine, existing patterns of movement, natural gathering points, places where decisions implicitly get made, informal nodes of trust and information sharing. The first step is to carefully observe and map these existing social and physical patterns. You don't necessarily try to relocate them or impose something alien. You understand the existing energy flows and then work to align, amplify, and make them more coherent using conscious town logic. Find the heartbeat first.
Phase 2, embed the civic intelligence stack. How does that start?
Gradually and context appropriately. You don't suddenly impose the entire AANCFDSCSCSCS system overnight. You start small. Maybe a neighborhood association begins using clear performance roles and feedback for managing local projects, a taste of AAN. Perhaps a community center installs a simple public dashboard showing energy use or volunteer hours, an early CFDS node. Maybe a few local businesses start experimenting with a local time credit exchange for specific services, a seed of CSCS. You introduce these elements where they solve a real problem or offer clear value, prove their effectiveness at that scale, and allow them to grow organically as people see the benefits.
Phase 3, anchor identity through symbolic infrastructure. What does that involve?
This is about consciously cultivating the cultural layer to support the transformation. Using community rituals, maybe celebrating milestones in the retrofitting process, starting a new annual local event to mark the shift and build shared memory. Intentionally introducing the archetypes, Emma Rosa Cincinnati, through storytelling or workshops to provide models for contribution, adding visual signals, murals reflecting local values, consistent signage, shared symbols that create a sense of belonging and shared purpose. It's about deliberately building the architecture of civic meaning within the evolving physical and social space.
And phase 4, rewire flows of trust, time, and surplus. This sounds like the deepest level.
This is where the transformation becomes truly systemic. It involves implementing more robust versions of the intelligence stack, perhaps establishing a formal time banking system or local currency that replaces or significantly supplements traditional volunteerism or cash transactions. Transparently tracking shared surplus, like energy savings or community garden yields, and distributing the benefits via mechanisms linked to the real wealth ledger, making sure that significant civic roles are genuinely filled based on participation, competence, and performance feedback from the system, rather than old hierarchies, status, or popularity. This is the phase where the underlying logic really takes hold, and the benefits in terms of trust, time wealth, and shared prosperity become undeniable. It's when people stop asking, what is this strange new system, and start saying, this makes sense. I want my life and my community to function like this.
This phased framework makes the complex process seem more achievable and adaptable to very different starting points: urban, rural, institutional.
Exactly. The underlying logic, modularity, feedback, walkability, ethical economics, accountable governance, cultural coherence remains non-negotiable, but how it gets implemented is flexible and context-dependent.
And they also highlight potential pitfalls to avoid during conscious townification. What are those?
Yes, success isn't guaranteed. They warn against common failure modes. A leader or small group dominating the process, failing to adhere to the principles of distributed roles and contracts, no real AAN, mistaking superficial aesthetic changes or branding exercises for genuine systemic transformation, prioritizing speed and visible results over the slower, essential work of building trust and ensuring genuine participation, relying on vague utopian promises instead of providing clear, practical scaffolding, tools, and transparent metrics. The ultimate measure of success, they reiterate, isn't how cool it looks or how fast it happens, but whether it demonstrably increases clarity, trust, and time wealth for everyone involved.
That brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the Conscious Towns Charter. This sounds like the foundational agreement or constitution for the entire global network.
It's presented exactly like that, as the shared operating system, a living constitutional structure that defines the core logic, ethical principles, and responsibilities binding all recognized conscious towns together. It's designed to create an ethical mesh, allowing for individual town autonomy and diversity while ensuring alignment on fundamental principles. It aims to foster collective evolution without collapse or fragmentation into competing ideologies. It's not a rigid top-down rulebook, but a shared structure for coherence and mutual accountability.
What is the specific role of the charter in the network?
It serves to answer the fundamental questions that arise when you try to build a decentralized network based on shared values. What are the absolute non-negotiable principles that guide all conscious towns? How can these principles be applied effectively and consistently in diverse local contexts without resorting to central control? How is feedback from the real-world experiences of individual towns integrated back to refine and evolve the collective understanding and the charter itself? It provides the common language, the ethical framework, and the governance structure for a global network of independent but deeply aligned living systems.
And what are the 9 core principles outlined in the charter?
They're essentially the distillation of the entire blueprint into its most fundamental, non-negotiable elements. 1. Human-scale modularity. Designing all systems, physical, social governance, around the limits of human perception, trust, and movement, ensuring walkability, local control, biocoherent units. 2. Feedback-based governance. Using transparent metrics, performance contracts, AAN, and visible feedback loops, CFDS, so the system adapts based on real-world results. 3. Time wealth as primary metric, prioritizing and measuring the quality and autonomy of residents' time and attention over traditional economic indicators like GDP. 4. Ethical economic logic, implementing the CSES principles: no extraction, capped ROI, universal basic assets, time credits, local surplus reinvestment to align the economy with well-being. 5. Civic participation through role logic, ensuring civic roles are earned, transparent, accountable, and reversible based on performance and participation, not persuasion or privilege. 6. Cultural coherence with freedom, fostering local expression and diversity while ensuring alignment with the core structural principles through unifying symbols, rituals, and narratives. 7. Regenerative infrastructure, embedding food, energy, water, care, and education systems directly into the town's fabric in ways that are ecologically positive and support biological health. 8. Redundancy and resilience. Proactively designing for anticipated failures, black swan events, and ensuring buffers and adaptability across physical, digital, civic, and ecological domains. 9. Global interoperability. Enabling sovereign towns to connect, share knowledge, trade ethically, and evolve collectively through shared protocols and trust without central command.
That's a remarkably comprehensive framework for building a potentially very different kind of civilization. How does the charter itself stay relevant and avoid becoming rigid or outdated?
It's explicitly designed not to be frozen in time. There's a built-in global feedback loop envisioned to operate on a regular cycle, perhaps every 5 years or so. This process would involve gathering systematic performance audits from participating towns, collecting structured feedback from citizens across the network, considering proposals for amendments based on real-world experience, and having these reviewed and ratified by some form of decentralized steward assembly representing the network. This ensures the charter maintains its core integrity while evolving based on the collective intelligence and lived experience of the entire ecosystem. System integrity, not static rules.
So it manages to bind the network together on core principles without creating a stifling central authority.
That's the crucial design challenge it aims to solve. It seeks to prevent the inherent risks of centralization, like bureaucracy, control, loss of local adaptation, by defining shared ethics and operational principles that autonomous towns adhere to voluntarily because they see the value. It allows for local iteration, experimentation, and cultural diversity within those defined boundaries. It fosters a sense of global belonging and shared purpose without requiring a single world government or institution. The towns are viewed as interconnected civic organisms, and the charter provides the harmonic structure ensuring they can learn and adapt together constructively.
It sounds like the charter itself functions as a vital piece of civic trust infrastructure at the global scale.
The source material makes exactly that comparison. Just as a well-functioning market provides necessary structure for commerce, or a constitution provides foundational principles for a nation-state, the charter is intended to provide the essential structure for trust, coherence, and cooperation across the decentralized network of conscious towns. It aims to bind without suffocating, adapt without diluting, and secure trust at scale through shared coherence and demonstrable results, not through top-down enforcement. Agreements work, systems work, trust grows.
Wow. Okay. We have taken a really deep dive into this blueprint for conscious towns. It's a comprehensive and, I have to say, quite compelling vision for living systems designed fundamentally to actually listen to people, to the environment, and to evolve with the lives lived within them.
It really is a powerful argument. The core premise is that the systems most of us inhabit now are, in many ways, structurally deaf. They're often static, fragmented, disconnected from our real needs, sometimes actively extractive. And this conscious town blueprint offers a detailed, practical, alternative pathway towards building places intentionally rooted in fostering clarity, trust, and that essential time wealth.
We've explored the specifics: that human-scale physical design with the pods and superblocks, the innovative civic intelligence stack replacing traditional politics with adaptive contracts and feedback loops, the culture engine designed to proactively build trust through symbols and rituals, the post-ego Cincinnati leadership framework, the shift to metrics that truly matter like time wealth and GHPI, and that finance model explicitly designed against extraction.
And significantly, we learned this isn't just abstract theory or what does it make possible in your own mind. Something to think about.
Think about that as you go about your week. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.
Thank you.